Welcome to How to Become a Production SQL Database Administrator. My name is Raphael. In this second course to SQL Administration Part 2, we've been looking at primarily at the tools to how to improve performance. Continuing with that vein, we're going to start looking at a concept called data partitioning. But before we begin that, let me just illustrate a couple of things here. One thing I'm going to do, which you already have, so highlight SQL2 and execute. Here you'll notice I've got a simple select statement from the table people2. And if I highlight that and execute, and you can see that the response time is pretty quick because we only have 1,000 rows. Well, let's talk about now doing a select statement against a table called people3. Now, as I execute this, you'll notice that the query has been executed. And obviously it's taking a lot longer than the table people2 because this particular table has grown to 10 million rows. And as you can see, it's going to take about 2 minutes and 10 seconds just to retrieve that data from a select statement. So the whole point is that as the table grows in time and size, we get more inserts, we get more updates, we get more deletes, and we get more increase in size of the table. And over the course of times, this table can have millions upon millions upon millions of rows, if not billions. And the size of the database can get into 100 gigs, 200 gigs, or even in certain places, terabytes. So that when it gets to that stage, we're looking at a different way of approaching database maintenance and table maintenance. And this is where the concept of data partitioning or table partitioning comes in. So as you can see, it's taken me approximately 2 minutes just to select that, and that's because we have a tremendous amount of information in that table called people3, and I'm going to stop it right now. So if I were to execute this, which is what we had from the previous, which has 100 million rows, and obviously that's going to take a tremendous amount of time to retrieve that data, but I'm not going to do it. So you understand that within time, a table can grow and grow until it can become unmanageable. Now this becomes a problem in terms of performance, and this is what these next couple of videos are going to be dedicated to. So where does table partitioning come in when you have large tables? So let's go to our Word document and let's talk about the concept of what is partitioning. Well, let me go over here first before I give you a representation. So imagine that you have a table, and this particular table that we're talking about, that we were working with, it doesn't by any means contains hundreds of million rows, but for our demonstration purposes, you can see what I'm talking about. So imagine this is a table, and it's got approximately, let's say, 1 gig, and it's got this various amounts of data. In the course of time, obviously, this table will have a lot of inserts, and as such, it's going to grow and grow and grow with a tremendous amount of minutes. And as you can see, from here to here, this table has grown, and this table can now, let's say, represents 100 gigs. So let's look at what the note says. As the table gets bigger and bigger in time, it becomes more difficult to manage. The space required, the speed of data retrieval, the increased I/O activity, the hardware resources, the deletes, the inserts, the updates, the selects, and even the backup and restores all start pressing upon the SQL server and the hardware. To remedy this, one can use what we consider what's called table partitioning. And primarily, table partitioning, simply put, divides the content of a table into smaller, manageable chunks of data in what's called a file group. So that's what table partitioning does. It basically takes this huge table that has increased in size, and we're going to basically sever it into smaller pieces. And the next slide will demonstrate that. So as you can see, so here's the original table, and imagine now this is 100 gigs or 200 gigs or 1 terabyte saver. And what we want to do now is a couple of things. We want to first create what I call file groups, and file groups can be considered as containers, if you will. And when you create a database, as you know, let me actually go here and illustrate that for you. So when I go right click here and go to properties, and we've gone over this before, but as you know that when you create a database, there are two files created. One is the data file and one is the log file. And this is the primary file, and this is the log file. But obviously we want to create additional file groups. This is a file group, and we're going to be showing you how to create separate containers for other data to come. So that's what we're going to do in a second. So let me go back to notes, or let me go back here. So you've got this tremendous amount of data in a single table. And to remedy this growing thing and to aid in backups and restores and performance issues that we've been talking about, we're going to basically take this table and divide it into many parts. And in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to first determine how to partition the table. Generally speaking, most databases and most tables have what's called timestamps. So in this particular demonstration, I'm going to be separating the data into file groups, separate file groups, and I'm going to be basing it upon the year of that data. So as you can see in this particular table, I've got data from 2005, 2007, 2006, 2006, and so on. So it's got all this various data. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create file groups, which are containers, and I'm going to call that file group, for our purposes, file group 2005. I'm going to create another file group, which is 2006. I'm going to create another file group 2007, and I'm going to create another file for any of the data that's not inclusive of these. And I'll be showing you that in a second. So each partition for each schema year and dump the data into this container. So this is what I'm going to be doing in a second. So now if we go here, that will give you a better illustration. So what I'm doing basically is taking all the data from this major primary table, and wherever I see data for 2005, I'm going to dump it into a table or a container called file group 2005. I'm going to collect all the data for 2006 and dump it into a container called file group 2007. I'm going to do the same for 2007, and what's not in these 3 containers is going to go here. So any of the data that we start adding that does not correspond to this range, if you will be dumped here. And so let me look at here. The other thing is, obviously, is you can use data for archiving data. So back to our original table here, if you've got a tremendous amount of data with old data that's not being used, and let's say you have a billion records, and of those billion records, 100 million are 2015 or 2016, and you're utilizing those, meaning you're using queries against that data. But anything beyond that, meaning any data from 2014, 2013, 2012, or beyond that, we need to archive and put it in a separate file group. So you can do that also, and I'll be showing you that also. So archive all data into a single partition and make it read-only. So this is physically what we're going to be doing. So in a nutshell, what we're going to do basically is we're going to take a large table that's become unmanageable in terms of content. We're going to create separate containers called file groups. And what we're going to do is we're going to partition the table, meaning we're going to divide the table and then allocate all the data that belongs to this file group, where you see data for 2005 in this file group, where you see 2006 in this file group, 2007 here, and everything else that do not belong to this in this. So let's go back to our academics. So again, so now you have a visual understanding of partition. Let's look at some of the academics and look at the reasonings and some of the benefits of partitioning. So the data of a partition table in the index is divided into units that can be spread across one or more file groups in a database, as I just mentioned. This data is partitioned so that groups of rows are mapped to individual partitions. And that's what I mean by groups of rows. And I'll be showing you that in a second through SQL. Table partitioning, just to note, is an enterprise edition feature only, meaning if you have the standard version, then you cannot do it. And if you have the express version, then you cannot do it. You have to have the standard version. And I'll show you that to make sure that you have the standard version. So now, continuing. So what are primary files and file groups? Well, I just illustrated to you here is that when you create a database, which we've shown you already, when you create a database, you have 2 primary file groups, and they are the data file groups and the and the log file groups. And in order to create extra file groups for those extra data for those containers, we're going to go to file groups and add them here, and I'll be demonstrating that to you in a second. So that's what a file group does. It's basically a container to hold files. So SQL partition table creation. So what is the order, if you will, of creating partition table? And they're as follows. What I'm going to be demonstrating to you is I'm going to be first creating file groups on individual disks if possible. Now, obviously for performance reasons, if you can allocate file groups to separate disks, then obviously you get better performance. Then we're going to create what's called a partition function. Then we're going to create what's called a partition scheme. And then we're going to actually partition the table based on the years that we selected. And I'll be showing you that in a second. This is a script that you can execute, and I'll be giving that to you. So we can look at, once we've created partition, you can get information about it. So now that you have an idea of what partitioning is, what are the benefits of partitioning? Now, I'll be honest, partitioning is a pretty complex thing, even though it's going to be demonstrated to you somewhat easy. But it does require certainly planning, planning, thoughts, and exercise on a demo before you actually do it. So make sure you have well planned this out and understand the reasoning why you want to partition it. Just because you have a large table does not necessarily mean you have to partition. So let's look at some of the benefits here of partitioning. Data partitioning improves performance of SQL queries, data management. So this is going to be important also. If you've got databases that are backing up and it's taking hours or days to back up because it's such use, now we can take that table, put it into separate file groups, and now we can individually back up those file groups. And that's a great benefit also. Remember index management. Remember, the larger the size of a table that you have, if you have millions upon millions of rows, and if you've got clustered or non-clustered index on it, as you know, when we talked about indexing, that management of indexes is also increasing. So you're going to have to be wary of that. It allows you to spread data into different physical disks, leveraging the concurrent performance of those disks, as I mentioned. So if you do have, and I'll be demonstrating that to you in a second, through a creation of folders rather than physical disks as demonstration. You can separate the data into partition based on date, as I said. So that's another thing, obviously, we can do. You can transfer or access subsets of data quickly and efficiently, and I'll show you that in a second. You can perform maintenance operations on one of the more partitions quickly. So because they are separate containers, we can actually do performance on separate containers and restore them rather than the whole entire database or the entire table. What else do we improve performance by enabling lock escalation? We've talked about what locks are and how you get deadlocks. Obviously, if you have a massive, large table and you're doing a select statement or an update or insert statement, then obviously you're going to have lock escalation, and we can that can be improved by having smaller chunks. Partitioning. The other thing is partitioning is not visible to the end user. So even though I've taken this one table and I've separated it into separate chunks, if you will, to the end user, they're still seeing this. They're still seeing this one big table. To them, it's completely invisible. So that's a good thing. The other thing is that less frequently accessed data can be placed on slower disks, and more frequently accessed can be placed on faster disks. Now, this is an important concept also. And back to here, this is what I was saying. For example, if you decide that you want to take all this data and you want to dump it into a file group where you have archival data that basically you're not accessing on a daily or weekly basis, you can separate that data and put it in a separate file group from the most current data, and then you can actually make this a read-only file, and then you can just back this up once and just leave it there, and you don't have to constantly back this entire 100 gig or half a terabyte database. We can just back this up once and that's it. And then we can do backup maintenance on this smaller chunk or file group. So that's a great benefit also. And obviously, as I said, we can have them read-only. And then this is important, as I said, in terms of data maintenance. If data needs to be restored, it is possible to restore the partition with the most critical data first. So back to here. So if we've got to this stage, we've taken this entire table and we've partitioned it to historical or archival data, and then we've partitioned it to the most current data, then we can restore this quickly and then take our time, if you will, and restoring this. We don't have to restore both of them in order for it to be online. So this is a great benefit of partitioning. So as I mentioned, there's a couple of steps you have to do to set up partitioning, and that is called partitioning. We have to create what's called our partitioning function and a partition scheme. Basically, partitioning function basically defines the ranges of data that's going to be distributed. And visually what I mean by that is this is a partitioning function. We're taking this entire table, we're determining what kind of distinct values they have, and then we base it on that. In this particular case, we're going to be doing distinct values on the years. So we're going to take, so this is going to be a partition function for 2005, for 2006, 2007, and the rest of the data. So that's what we mean by partitioning function. When we talk about the schema, partition schema uses the partition function to map ranges to appropriate files. And what I mean by that is that we haven't created the, once you actually create, let me go back here. Once you actually create a file group, obviously within that file group, you have to create what's called a file. And that file basically is where you're going to be dumping all the data to. And I'll be showing you that in a second. So for example, if I go here, let me go to my C drive. Let me go to Files. And let me find the ones I'm looking for, which is this, I believe. And Data. So now you'll see the AdventureWorks 2004. These are obviously the files. When I create files for that data to be dumped, you'll see more being created here. And I'll show you that in a second when we get into the SQL. So that, let me just look at the time. So I want to make sure that, so I'm going to be actually continuing this lesson in the next one. So let me just repeat what we're doing, and then we're going to get into the next, we're actually going to get into the next video where we're going to actually start demonstrating what partitioning is using T-SQL. I'm also going to show you how to partition a table, use both, as I always do, using T-SQL and SQL query. So the first thing I want you to do, because we may be doing it a couple of times, is I want you to back up this data. Now, how did I get this data? You already know how to get this data. I've already shown you that in the course 1. But if you don't, just go to codeplex.com and dump the data and then back it up. So the first thing I always do is I back up the data, because then if I want to retrieve it, I can. At this point, as you can see, if I go to file groups, I don't have any file groups made other than the primary. And this is where we're going to be adding. So I'm going to be deleting and adding and deleting. So what I want you to do is download this database, and you should know how to do that, and then back it up. And this is the script that I use to back it up, and I'll provide that for you. And the only thing you'll have to basically change is basically the directory, the path where you want to dump your backup. So once you've done that, that's fine. So just to reiterate what we're talking about, and let's go back here. So what is data? What is table partitioning or database partitioning? So it's a concept where you're getting, the table has grown to a tremendous amount, where it's getting into hundreds and hundreds of millions, if not billions of rows, and it's causing performance issues. The inserts are taking too long, the select statement is too long, the updates, and so on. And not only that, but the management of it is taking too long. It's taking too long to back up, too long to restore, too long to re-index. All those features are coming in because of this nature of the size of the database, hence the size of the table has become unmanageable. And in order to do that, we employ what's called database partitioning, which basically takes the table that we're in question and we make it into, take this huge table that has grown to this size, we create file groups, we create files within them, and then we dump the necessary data from there into this to manageable chunks of data. So that's the principle of partitioning table, and I'll be going over that in the next video. So I think I'll leave it here, and then we'll continue talking about the actual demonstration in the next video. So I think you have enough concept of understanding what a partition table is. And I'll leave it there, and I'll see you in the next video. So my name is Raphael, and this is how to become a production SQL database administrator. See you in the next video.